My parents would be so proud. Thank you, Mika. Thank you, PDF, for having me here today. Thank you to all of you. Very much looking forward to this conversation, a very important conversation. So, as Mika mentioned, as I asked him to mention, I am the daughter of a Haitian immigrant. I, myself, am a Haitian immigrant. My story, my family story, is very much the classic American tale. My parents moved here, like many other immigrants that come to this country, looking for the American dream, to have a better life for themselves and for their children. They really wanted to achieve that elusive American dream. But like many other immigrants, my parents are also American patriots. After moving here to New York, my parents insisted that we all go to DC. They wanted to take a trip to DC. I want to be really clear here. My parents never took a vacation. Throughout my life, they never took a vacation, still have not. So this was really important to them. They worked 6-7 days a week. My dad, New York City cab driver, my mom, a home health care aide, and they worked really hard just to put food on the table. So they understood the importance and the promise of this country, and they wanted us to make sure that we did as well, because they believed in this country's liberty, democracy, and its potential. They believed in the Constitution and what it stands for. So we spent our day in Washington, D.C. We visited the monuments, we walked on the mall, we went to the museum, and we spent our last few hours in front of the White House, right outside of the gate, of course. And like most tourists who go to Washington, D.C., we took a picture. And it was a picture of myself and my cousins. That's me in the little dark jacket there. And it was almost as if I was learning about foreshadowing before I knew what foreshadowing was all about. Because fast forward to 2009, as I was after the President Obama's inauguration, and I was getting ready to join the new administration, my cousin, who was there with us, gave me that photo. And he said to me, I want you to remember this photo and to remember this moment. Every time you walk into the White House, I want you to remember that you are accomplishing, living the dream of your parents. That how important this moment is. That you were a young girl who didn't speak any English, who was awed by the White House, and now you're making history with the first Black president. So now I can stand here and talk for hours about how intense the White House is, how we had to deal with crises over and over again, how a team of people came together to stave off problems and emergencies. And I know that some of us may have differences about President Obama. But I think one thing that we could agree on is that he was competent and he had the right temperament for the position. I think about my time in the White House often these days, as you can imagine why. And I think about what's at stake. Because as we're learning more and more, the Oval Office is incredibly powerful. In Donald Trump, we have someone who lacks basic competence, who doesn't seem to have any temperament, who is bigoted, unhinged, lives in a world of fake news, and wants to scapegoat communities, targeted communities. He's reckless, he's dangerous. And I think what's the most scariest part of it all is that we know that one day there's going to be a major crisis. What would he do if there was a Boston Marathon bombing? How would he react? How would he react if there was a San Bernardino shooting? What would happen if the events in London and Manchester happened here in the United States? What would he do? At Move On, as Mika mentioned, we're calling this a predictable emergency, which is essentially an emergency, a terrible emergency that Trump flares up, and it leads us to a crisis. And as we talk about this, we need to think about two things. The first thing is, how will Trump react to a domestic event or an international invocation? Second one, which I think is really important, and what we're trying to deal with now, is how would we react? What is it that we would do? So let's take on the first question. We know that Donald Trump revels in authoritarianism. We know Trump wants to shed the rule of law. We know Trump ignores ethical norms. We know Trump abuses his power. We know Trump wants to eliminate the civil liberties of targeted communities. And don't take my word for it, just look at his actions. Muslim ban, his first important initiative, targeting Muslim communities or targeting Muslims so that they couldn't enter the country. Thank goodness the lower courts decided to block them. Let's look at Syria. He impulsively launched 59 missiles into Syria after a chemical attack without any congressional authorization. And he did it largely on emotional reaction by watching Fox News. That's how someone who's supposed to be president of the United States decided to make this decision. North Korea. They've been baiting him, and because they've been doing that, they've been successful in Trump increasing a series of military deployments, which Trump has said himself that this could end a major conflict. This should sound familiar. There's war in the air. Trump has also embraced dictators. He finds himself to be more comfortable with them than our allies, our democratically elected allies in Europe or across the world. Now, what does this tell us about how Trump responds to threats? How does he react to a crisis? Trump reacts with force, Trump abuses power, Trump does it with a rejection of past norms, with a disregard for the Constitution and the rule of law. And he does this sometimes to seek short-term political gain, to distract us from something else. We have to remember that timing is everything with him. Think Russia and imagine Trump using war as a tool to distract us from scandal. What this could mean for vulnerable communities, perhaps immigrants like my parents, like myself, being targeted by vigilantes in the wake of an attack, stigmatized because of their religion or the color of their skin. All along, Trump praising, encouraging that kind of reaction from the sideline. We have to consider the worst case scenario. We have to prepare for a situation where a predictable emergency is used to suspend civil liberties, deport targeted populations, launch warrantless searches of private homes, declare martial law, imagine entire communities rounded up. But guess what? That's happening already with the Latino immigrant communities. Even with my own community, the Haitian community. Right now, we're waiting for Trump to make a decision on 50,000 immigrants, if he's going to deport them or not. We have to consider the launch of another war. Now, question number 2. Answering the question of how we will react. What is it that we are going to do? Well, first, we have to cover our basics. We got to do the usual things, which is consult with experts, test messages and create counter narrative, utilize TV and social media, hold electeds accountable, demand that they play their role. It's also crucial we respond in the first 48 hours after a major crisis. We need to speak up immediately. But let's have real talk. Let's be very honest here. We don't have all the answers. There's no playbook to fight back fascism. There's no Twitter storm that can stop naked dictatorship. Trump will not be brought down by Facebook posts alone. So one thing I want to do is look at examples of resistance from others who have stood up to oppressive governments. In South Africa, Nelson Mandela spent 27 years in prison for opposing apartheid. In the Jim Crow South, you had the Freedom Riders, at great personal risk, defy the racist regime. In Haiti, where my family's from, over 200 years ago, you had Jean-Jacques Dessalines and Toussaint Louverture. They threw off their shackles, freed the slaves, and liberated Haiti from the French. So I ask you, if you really believe we are in extraordinary times, if you believe that Trump is a threat to our democracy, threat to our families, threat to our civil liberties, threat to the most marginalized among us, immigrants like my parents, like myself, who will be targeted first. What are you willing to do? Would you drop everything to attend a mass protest in the face of a possible crackdown? Would you be a human shield to prevent ICE deportation? So it's time we start putting pieces in place to prepare for a predictable emergency. We need to recruit rapid response mobilizers who will be ready to react immediately in a crisis, expanding beyond the large cities that have been the epicenter of the resistance to date. But our coalition must grow to be successful. We need all of your help, all of you and all of your networks as well. I'm asking you to contribute. What is your personal contribution to this? Because it's going to happen. We know this. Are you a programmer, a media influencer, a community leader, organizer? What can you uniquely contribute in the critical 48 hours after a predictable emergency? Because here's what we know. A predictable emergency is coming. I know from my time in the White House that every administration gets tested. We know Trump's reaction will trade off on fear and demagoguery. Knowing that all of this is coming only expands our responsibility. We must be prepared. We must stand up. Help us send a message to the rest of the country and the world that we stand ready to defend those same values and beliefs that brought my parents and so many Americans to this country in the first place. Let us define our patriotism anew. I'm Karine Jean-Pierre. Thank you for joining the fight.